Welcome everyone to episode 2 of Club Ausome Live. Today I'm joined by Sarah Petherbridge and Ruth Fogg. I will ask Sarah and Ruth to introduce themselves in a moment, but just so you know, these are friends. I've known Sarah through the Speakers Collective and Ruth through the Professional Speaking Association. I am your host, Charlie Hart. I'm also known as Ausome Charlie, with an AU for autistic because I'm openly autistic. I'm a professional speaker, mainly about neurodiversity inclusion, and my background is HR analytics. I'm also going to give you a brief audio description, and that's for the benefit of anybody who joins us who can't see us. So me, I'm a female presenting person in their late 40s. I've got straight red hair, slightly tinted glasses. I've got a t-shirt which shows The Scream by Edvard Munch, and that's due to all the technical issues I've had this week. Behind me is my home office wall with a countryside mural complete with a rainbow. Our theme for this event is deaf inclusion because this week is Deaf Awareness Week. Now, Sarah, firstly could you introduce yourself please and tell us a little about yourself?
Okay, hi everyone. So you're gonna have to bear with me. I've got a really bad cold this week. So I'm a little bit blocked up, so maybe blowing my nose occasionally. So just bear with me. So I was born profoundly deaf, and as you can see, I'm oral, so I speak, and I also lip read as my main communication style. I do know some British Sign Language, but I'm not fluent. And also, when I'm having communication with people, there's also an element of intelligent guesswork involved. So that's my main communication style. So what do I do? I'm an authentic and passionate disability awareness trainer, helping businesses create more inclusive workplaces for people with disabilities and helping businesses become more disability confident. I'm also a public speaker on disability, inclusion and mental health. Like Charlie, I'm a member of the Speaker Collective, as well as other speakers' organisations. So in terms of what I look like, so somebody with long brown wavy hair and wearing a navy blue top. And I've got a plain background, which is the wall of my dining room here in my house. And I've also got a tissue in my hand because I'm always blowing my nose. So that's a bit about me.
Thanks so much for being here, Sarah. And Ruth, could you introduce yourself as well, please?
Yes, first of all, thanks for having me. I class myself as a stress spout because I deal with all aspects of stress. But my business is called StressWorx with an X on the end, and I'm a therapist, a speaker, as well as an author. If you're listening, but you can't see me, there is a bookcase behind me. It's not actually a bookcase, it's wallpaper, but it makes a good virtual background. Now, I became profoundly deaf in my right ear and severely deaf in my left when I was 3 years old. I can tell you a bit more about that later on. But as I said, my business focuses on stress, but my superpower is lip reading, like Sarah, and I'm dependent on lip reading as well as my hearing aids. So in terms of how I look, it's actually my birthday tomorrow, but I'm not going to tell you how old I am. But I have short silvery coloured hair, and I'm wearing green earrings, which match my green t-shirt. So that's me. Back to you, Charlie.
Thank you, Ruth. Now, I'm not deaf myself, but I do have auditory processing disorder, which often co-occurs with autism and ADHD, and I've got both of those. So I am someone that benefits from having the subtitles on Netflix and being able to lip read. I'm fascinated by the topic of deaf inclusion because many reasons, but firstly, not excluding people by making things inaccessible is simply the right thing to do. Also, workplaces and society as a whole miss out when they fail to include and be accessible to deaf people, like any other marginalised minority groups. And increasing accessibility to the deaf community can help dismantle barriers to inclusion for other people too, especially neurodivergent people like me, and it doesn't disadvantage anybody. It's universal design. Now, setting up this event has been a lesson in itself because Sarah and Ruth both need live captions or subtitles. And I discovered that what I usually use for live streams, which is the Restream platform, cannot do this. Zoom can do it, but streaming from Zoom to LinkedIn was technically tricky. But I persisted because inclusion matters. I really hope it's working now. But if not, I'll upload this recording to YouTube later anyway. I would like to emphasise my guests are not a pain in the arse. They have needs, like all humans. It's the streaming technology that's been a pain in the arse. Sarah, can I turn to you firstly for some myth busting? What incorrect assumptions and misconceptions about being deaf would you like to clear up?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you for persevering with the technology. I really, really appreciate all the effort. So thank you very much for that. I think for me, the main deaf myth that I would like to bust is if you meet one deaf person, it doesn't mean that all deaf people are the same. We are not the same. So the deaf community is a complex one with different communication styles and different communication needs. We don't all sign, and that is the biggest misconception out there, that people think we all sign. I was born profoundly deaf, but I don't sign. I'm all and I lip read. Yes, some profoundly deaf people do sign, but not everyone. And the reasons for these different communication styles within the deaf community are complex and not straightforward. It could be down to a number of reasons. For example, the way we were brought up. So me personally, I was born and I grew up in a rural community. There were no other deaf people around. So my parents at that time decided that they wouldn't send me away to board at a deaf school away from the family. They wanted me to stay at home and go to a local mainstream primary school that had a partial hearing unit. And it was there that I started the years of intensive speech therapy. And also at that time, British Sign Language, or BSL, wasn't a recognised language, so we were never really encouraged to learn to sign. So that was how I was brought up, and that's why I'm oral and I lip read. And I guess there's no wrong or right way to communicate. It's up to the individual, and so people shouldn't make the wrong assumption that we're all the same and that we sign. And unfortunately, this misconception is still prevalent even now in public spaces, especially since BSL became an officially recognised language. So what you find is that you go to public spaces and they assume that if they provide you with a BSL interpreter, they have ticked the box and they have met your accessibility needs. And that is not so, because by just being inclusive for one part of the deaf community, you are inadvertently excluding what I think is the bigger part of the deaf community, for those of us who don't sign. And I can give you a real life example here. I've been called for jury service 3 times. Lucky me. And the last 2 times, the first 2 times, I was excused and obviously couldn't do it because there were no provision for accessibility. The last time I was called for jury service was after British Sign Language was recognised as a language. And they said that we could provide you with the BSL interpreter. I then went back to them and said, no, actually, I don't need a BSL interpreter. I need a note taker, someone who could sit with me in the courtroom and in the deliberation room to give me live subtitles. Bizarrely, they came back and said, we could provide you with a note taker for the courtroom, but not for the deliberation room. And that was on the basis that they felt that the note taker could influence my decision by giving me wrong subtitles or notes, if you like. I then argued back and said, well, what's to stop the BSL interpreter giving them the wrong information, the incorrect signs? But then said, why don't you come and have a look at the meeting room? Can you lip read everyone around the meeting room table? I said, no, because that's going to be stuffed hard work. Because imagine trying to lip read 12 people around a really large table. Now, I had to really put my foot down. And but then sent me an email, and it was quite funny. They said in bold and underlined, they said, on this occasion, you are excused from jury service. And I just feel like emailing them back and said, unless the law changes, I'm never going to be able to do jury service. But, I just couldn't be bothered. But that's just a really good example. Public spaces like courtroom are still not getting it right. So I think we still have got some way to go in busting that myth that all deaf people are the same and all deaf people sign.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. You mentioned this to me in our pre-meeting, and I was shocked because to me, our jury service is meant to be a broad cross-section of society. So if it's excluding certain people because they've got needs and the courts and tribunals service can't accommodate those needs, then that's a real problem. Inclusion matters. So coming to you now then, Ruth, what myths about deafness would you like to bust?
That deaf people are not daft. That is the biggest assumption that I think people make, because 74% of us wear glasses and 1 in 6 are deaf. 12 million people have hearing impairment in this country. We can see glasses. I'll take mine off because of the reflection. And nobody, excuse the pun, blinks an eye. We just assume correctly that there is some form of visual impairment. But unless you're sitting behind me, you can't see my hearing aids. So if I get a couple of words wrong, I guess, as Sarah's already said, we try and fill in the gaps. And I might guess wrongly, and I have done that on occasion. But it's the assumption that deaf people are daft. Now, I grew up actually believing that. I was knocked down by a car when I was 3 and I fractured both ears, but that wasn't discovered actually until I was 16. But between the ages of 3 and 8, when my parents were fighting to get my deafness acknowledged, I taught myself how to lip read. Now, I got a hearing aid when I was 8, but when I was 11, I was told that I was not able to cope with grammar school education because I was deaf. And at that point, that seed was sown that I was deaf and therefore daft. And that stayed with me until I got my master's degree. And I thought, hang on a minute. Yes, I am deaf. I'm not quite so daft. So, people do make assumptions, understandably in some ways. But it's like during COVID, when people were wearing masks. Well, that's an absolute nightmare for lip readers. And I would ask people, would you please step back, lower your mask so I can actually see what you're saying? And for people to grasp that you have to see to hear, it's a bit difficult. But people would refuse and raise their voices and shout, which of course distorts their voices anyway. But there are also myths around subtitles or captions, because yes, we can get them on television on certain channels, but how many of us have to flick through Amazon to find a film or a series that actually has subtitles? Hotels, planes, ships, yeah, they all have films on. Very, very few of them have subtitles. And it's so frustrating, even though the law says that there should be subtitles.
Yeah.
Ofcom should be monitoring it. It
Thanks.
doesn't.
Yeah, that's shocking. I mean, I need subtitles as well through auditory processing disorder, and I lip read as well. And I didn't even realize that until the pandemic, when suddenly out and about in the shops, I couldn't even hear my own husband unless he lowered his mask. So it's the other thing to me, I'm listening to this as a neurodivergent person who felt broken for a long time and like I was the problem. And that grammar school made you feel like you were the problem when they were the ones that were daft for not being advanced and progressive enough to include you. So there is a lot of synergy here between what you've been going through and the struggles that the neurodivergent community face. And I really like this metaphor. I can't remember off the top of my head who said it, but if a flower fails to bloom, then you don't blame the flower, it's the environment. And that's true of in this as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I agree with Ruth about, the myth around, deaf people not being intelligent. I mean, I think that was definitely prevalent when I was growing up. It's almost like low expectations that people have of deaf people. When I think a really good friend of mine, Kate Nash, I don't know if you've heard of her, but
Kate Nash,
she talks about
singer-songwriter.
No, Kate Nash is she does that Purple Space. It's a disability organisation.
I know.
She's a bit of a blade runner, if you like, in the disability space. But she talked about the sort of the bigotry of low expectation. Though people think that it can apply to any disability, but you are disabled, therefore you're not expected to do much or achieve much. And I think that was prevalent certainly when I was growing up. You weren't expected to do much. I mean, bless my parents, they thought that perhaps the best I could do would be someone working in the shop, where I think I've exceeded that in terms of getting my university education and getting qualified as an accountant and so on. But it is definitely that low expectation that is prevalent for people with disabilities. Thankfully that has changed somewhat, but it was very common when I was growing up.
Yeah, I totally understand that. There's this eternal child bias as well with autism. And if people have low expectations of us, then we can develop self-limiting beliefs as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sarah, could you share some advice with us, practical advice about how we can be more inclusive to members of the deaf community and why?
I guess, I think it's just, as I mentioned, about our communication styles, I think it's just being mindful of the differences that we have in our communication styles. They're really just asking us on an individual basis, what our communication styles are, what our communication needs are as well, and how they can help. So, avoiding making the wrong assumptions about the sort of help that you think that we may need. So always ask, how can we help? What do you need to be able to participate in meetings in the workplace, for example? So I think put aside all your misconceptions and assumptions, just ask us on an individual basis, because we're all different. I think also, talk to us as well. We are human beings. Definitely can be a very lonely and very isolating disability, because we don't always hear what's been said. Please talk to us. And we won't bite your head off if you get it wrong. We'll just educate you for next time, but please talk to us. And while you do talk to us, just sort of being mindful of the language you need. There's been a lot of talk even on LinkedIn, about the sort of inclusive language we should be using when we are communicating with people with disability. Avoiding what we call ableist language, which is language that can devalue somebody with a disability. There's just being respectful in the language as well. And I guess in terms of workplaces, there's lots of things you can do to be inclusive for people who are deaf in your team. But I'm just thinking of an example, like in the meeting, again, before you go into the meeting, asking your deaf employer what you need to be able to participate in that meeting. Do you need a BSL interpreter? Do you need caption? Where is the best place for you to sit? Checking the lighting in the room, make sure there's not too much background noise. Do you need an agenda for the meeting? I always need to find it very helpful to have the agenda before the meeting, so I kind of knew what to expect. And I think the other important thing as well, meeting, and that might apply to you as well, Charlie, is I often talk about the 6-second rule. That basically what that means is if anyone who is facilitating the meeting, just to ensure that everyone has enough time to listen and process what's being said and then being able to respond. So given that little extra bit of time, that 6 seconds, and in that way you can avoid people over talking and whatever. So for someone like myself who is deaf, because I lip read, I need that 6 seconds. I need somebody to give me that 6 seconds to lip read, to work out in my own brain what I think I've lip read, process it, and then respond. So I'm not like a hearing person that can quickly, get it and respond quickly in the meeting. So I think by giving us more time, you can process the information and you can contribute to that meeting. So I would ask anyone who are facilitating the meeting to make sure we're given that extra time, and that would be more inclusive as well.
Yes.
There's lots more examples, but that's some examples that I can give you how to be more inclusive to to deaf people.
What really strikes me about what you've just said is every single one of those are things that advantage neurodivergent people. They remove barriers to inclusion for neurodivergent people as well, and anxious people and everybody. So one thing I would add there, if the synergy is a two-way street, if you were doing an interview like this or like a job interview, knowing the questions in advance is going to really help you, isn't it? So we had a little talk about what your needs were, and I put in writing what I'm planning to ask you. So even if you can't understand what my lips are saying and the Zoom captions are half wrong anyway, you know what I'm going to ask. And that's to me, that's a universal design thing that would help anybody. If you're going to be interviewed, then you're expected to prepare, and how best to prepare is to know what you're going to be asked.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a lot of synergy there. Thanks very much, Sarah. And the same question to Ruth, please. Could you share some advice about how we can all be more inclusive to members of the deaf community?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's my responsibility to let people know that I need a seat in the front row, or in the theatre, could they please put the loop system on? 9 times out of 10, it is not switched on. They have it, but they don't switch it on. Also, if you're in a group situation, like we were both at a conference recently, and there was a panel discussion, and there were questions from the floor. Now, the facilitator did not repeat those questions. So I didn't know what the questions were. I got the answers, but I didn't have the questions. So it's making sure, and I had actually told that person.
I was going to say we need to feed that back to Marina.
I'd already done that, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And also, if I'm facilitating a group, I will share, yes, I am deaf, but I am a good lip reader. But if you want to ask a question, sorry to be teacherish, but please put your hand up, because otherwise, by the time I've worked out who's speaking, they've finished.
Yes.
I haven't had a clue what the question was.
Mm.
The other thing,
Sorry, go on.
the other thing I think is really important is to be upfront about it. When I'm on the phone, somebody rings me, and I hate using the phone because I can't lip read and I can't follow podcasts without a transcript. But I will always say, please hold on, I need to amplify the phone. And I have to take my hearing aid out and amplify the phone because the two don't work together for some reason. And often people say, well, why is that? And I will say, look, I'm hard of hearing, but there comes a limit to how many times you can ask people to repeat themselves. And I think it's important, therefore, as I just said, to say, I am hard of hearing, I am deaf, please speak slowly and clearly. And if that person doesn't do that, then you could say, excuse me, could you please slow down? I have already said this. Or can we continue this conversation on Zoom? Or will you please write to me? Because I can't follow what you're saying. Now, it can be very difficult. To give you an example, I used to bank with HSBC, and they were based in India. So whenever I rang, it's a long way away, it was a poor line, but B, I just couldn't follow the accent. So I had to change my bank. So it's raising awareness, not just of deafness, but any form of disability, but taking responsibility for it. And I think that's the key for all of us.
Yeah. It takes a certain level of psychological safety, though, to be open about our needs and not fear mockery and discrimination, doesn't it? But it's absolutely essential to learn to self-advocate if you have these needs and they are going to cause barriers to inclusion in everyday life.
Yeah, I think I agree up to a point. I think, yeah, definitely step advocate and get, what you need. But I do think it's very tiring if it all falls on you.
Yeah.
I think, personally, I think, definitely step advocate and be really clear what you need. But I think it shouldn't just be on us, because that makes us feel that we're the problem. So I think, when we're asking people to be more inclusive, I think there has to be some effort coming from the other ways where there's just going happy medium, because it's quite tiring and quite knackering just to be self-advocating all the time. And it just reinforces the thought that we're the problem, we need to be fixed. So I do think there's a bit of effort on both sides, personally.
I agree. Yeah, and again, as an autistic worker, I am totally on that same page. So often we're expected to make a reasonable adjustment request and know everything that it is that would help us thrive in our roles. But quite often this could be more of a two-way process, and our employers and service providers could think, how could we work differently that would be more inclusive?
Yeah,
You've got to
definitely.
care. People need to care enough, and then they'll find out what they can do to make everybody included. But self-advocacy is a real skill, and we really need it. Where was I?
I see that as being assertive. I don't see it as a problem.
Yeah.
I see it as I'm taking responsibility. And yes, people need to be aware, but they're not going to be aware unless we tell them.
Yes. Yeah. I think if you're organising an event, though, you can be proactive and capture people's accessibility needs in advance. For instance, that's one way that somebody can make an effort to be consciously inclusive.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving on. As a late diagnosed autistic woman with ADHD, I prefer to describe myself as ADHD rather than saying I have autism or I have ADHD. I prefer identity first language over person first language. I respect the language preferences of each individual because it's the individual's prerogative to describe themselves however they like. But as far as I'm concerned, autistic is a neutral adjective. It's not a value judgment. So why not use the adjective to describe ourselves? So I'm autistic. I understand that it was the deaf community who were the first to reject person first language in favour of identity first language, paving the way for the autistic community. And I wondered what your thoughts were on this. Maybe Sarah first.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. It's a deaf community, like the way around it in terms of using identity first language rather than person first language. And that's not surprising really, because if you think about the history of the deaf community, before BSL was an officially recognised language, it was a community that had to protect itself. It became self-protecting, and I think it developed a very strong culture and an identity from it. The fact that there was they were being discriminated against, there were so many Bows and Hugers out there, then they formed a very strong community with a very strong identity. I personally use the identity first language myself. I identify myself as deaf. It's a big part of who I am. It shaped my personality and how I live my life. And I'm very much part of that deaf community. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. I do think it's down to personal preferences. There's no right or wrong answer, and I think people should be allowed to decide how they want to be referred to. So if they want to use their identity first language, great. Similarly, if they want to go down the person first language, that's not a problem. But I don't think, there's any right or wrong answer there. But I can understand why the deaf community is going down the identity first language. I'm an active member of the deaf community. It's a very, very strong culture and identity there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it is ultimately down to the individual preference. And I think the only wrong is when somebody tells others how they must identify.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I did a LinkedIn post once where I described myself as autistic and bisexual. And somebody who was not autistic came into my comments saying, you have autism, you are bisexual. Autism is something you have, bisexual is something you are. And I thought, how dare she? And when I tried to explain that actually identity first is my preference and it is the preference of a lot of autistic adults, she got very stroppy with me because she'd been taught otherwise. So it's about listening to the individual, I think. What do you think, Ruth? Do you have a view on this?
It's a good question, and when I saw it on your question sheet, I thought about it because I don't think of those terms. I don't share with people I'm deaf unless I feel the need to. So if I'm in a one-to-one conversation, then I can read uncomfortable if the environment is quiet. It's not an issue.
Yeah.
So I don't have to identify as anything. I'm me, I'm Ruth. So that's a really complex one, I think. And yes, I am a deaf woman, but I'm not deaf with a capital D, completely, 100% deaf. I mean, when I look at people like Rose Ayling-Ellis and the young woman whose name escapes me, who's on Silent Witness, who are making really strong statements as deaf women, being on TV, I have nothing but admiration for them. How they would identify themselves, I don't know, but I guess they would identify themselves as deaf women.
Yeah.
I'm a woman who happens to be deaf. And I think that's possibly, different.
Yes.
Yeah.
You haven't shied away from using the adjective, though, have you? Though you're probably still leaning towards the identity first rather than person first, because you're not saying I have hearing impairments. But it's really interesting to hear the different perspectives, which is why I asked you both. But Ruth, do you have any tips for people who become hearing impaired or deaf later on in life?
Well, I think this is a real problem in our society, because like we tend to need glasses in later life, lots of people need hearing aids and support in later life. But because it's such a shock to them, or a change, it might be a gradual change, but they suddenly realize that their partner is saying the TV's too loud, or you're shouting or whatever, that the tip is to have your ears tested. Go to your GP, go to audiology, get a referral. And the other tip, I think, is that whilst you can have free audiograms in Boots and Specsavers and various other pharmacies, never forget that if you pay for hearing aids, their life is about 4 to 5 years, and you will then have to have them replaced. So as soon as you've paid out for one lot, you need to start saving for the next lot. With the NHS, they're free. You get free batteries, free tubing. They're replaced every 4 years without any argument. You get your earmuffs done. You might have to wait a bit longer, but it's certainly worth it.
Yeah.
But for the people living with people who are losing their hearing in later years, it's about patience. It's about looking them in the eye. It's about speaking slowly and clearly, which was said before. And maybe using some basic signing in the context of Makaton, which we haven't mentioned, because Makaton is more about gestures. And my 3-year-old grandson will go like this when he's had enough to eat. He's finished.
Yeah.
And I learned Makaton many years ago, but because I'm in a hearing world, I don't use it. If you don't use it, you lose it. But there are some basic signs that you can use to communicate with your body language to people without having to say much.
That's a good point. And now you mention it, my brother's autistic like me, and he was non-verbal until he was about 6 or 7. And he learned some basic signs to communicate when he's hungry or full or thirsty and things like that. So I don't know if that was Makaton or something else, but yeah, it could well have been. And I've forgotten the other thing that I was going to say, because I do have ADHD, but it will come back to me. Where was I? Sarah, do you have any tips for parents who suspect that their kid might be deaf?
I think nowadays they do hearing tests, when babies are born, pretty much. So I would hope that in most cases that it would have been picked up when the baby is born. But
Yeah.
if for some reason that it's not been picked up, and you suspect that your child may have a hearing loss, I think, like Ruth said, the first thing is to speak to your GP or health visitor and get a hearing test. And there could be a number of reasons why that child might have a hearing loss. So it isn't necessarily they're going to be a permanent hearing loss. It could be things like glue ear, which you can have an operation for. But I think just suspect that the child had a hearing loss, to go to the GP, get a hearing test as well. And alongside that, there are a number of charities they can speak to get help. So the good one is the national, I think it's the National Deaf Children Society, which my parents used when I was growing up. They're fantastic bank of resources, if you like, to get help from them. They're fantastic charities and they can be really, really helpful in terms of what steps you need to take in establishing whether your child has got a hearing loss as well. Also, the RNID, which is the Royal National Institute for the Deaf, has also got some really useful tips as well for parents. But I do think the first thing is, to go to the GP, get a hearing test. There could be a number of reasons why that child might have a hearing loss. So it isn't necessarily going to be a permanent hearing loss. So.
Thank you. I remembered what I was going to say at the end of Ruth's answer to the previous question. I'm just wondering, with my HR inclusion hat on, whether if somebody needs hearing aids and they work, whether they could apply for access to work to fund this. So I don't know if that's something you've come across, but I'll certainly look into it if not, because I get quite a lot of help from access to work for my autism, ADHD and complex PTSD. And I'm wondering if it extends to hearing aids as well. So that could potentially be really helpful if you have to replace them every 4 to 5 years.
Yes, I mean, personally, I've not actually applied for access to work because in my last job, I was working for a global firm. They paid for my reasonable adjustment. That didn't include a hearing aid because I had a hearing aid already. But what I did have by way of reasonable adjustment, I had a palantypist. This was before COVID, this was before video calls became more common. So a palantypist was somebody who was dialing remotely and provided with live subtitles, was an absolute lifesaver because I can't do audio calls very well. But as I became more and more senior, the main way of communication with clients was by way of conference calls. So the only way I could do that was, or lead them, was to have a palantypist or a remote captioner. And the EY, which was the firm that I worked for, they actually paid for it. So I've never really applied for access to work, but I have heard of people applying for
that sounds like the kind of thing that access to work might potentially fund. So I'm interested to go away and research that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, but I do want to wrap up. But I want to ask each of you firstly, Sarah first. No, Ruth first. Do you have any final take-home thoughts for the audience, Ruth, or any call to action?
I think the call to action is to be more aware. And if somebody's looking at you a bit blankly, it doesn't mean that they're not listening or they're stupid or whatever. It might mean that they can't actually hear you. So it's to be a little bit more sensitive, especially with the elderly and with children. Be patient and just take your time, speak slowly and clearly. Because, as I said right at the beginning, you can't see deafness any more than a lot of disabilities. But it's one of those that can be responded to fairly positively as soon as you are aware. And I think just one last thing, which I only discovered about 5 or 6 years ago, that if you have a national health hearing aid, you get a little book with it. And if you actually scan that book, you can get a disabled braille card, which means that you can go 2 for 1. So my husband is my ears when I'm on public transport. And it does mean you can go, you can travel anytime. You're not restricted to the off-peak hours. But that's apart from my hearing, it's the only perk I am aware of with actually being deaf. But no, I think it's be patient, don't make assumptions.
Fantastic, thank you. And the same question to you, Sarah. Do you have a final
Yeah.
take home or call to action?
Yeah, I think mine's probably about the same as Ruth, not making assumptions about us, we're not the same, every one of us is different, we have different communication styles, different communication needs, so please, do check out with us what do we need by way of accessibility, and so on. So, and also like Ruth said, just being patient with us, if you're a lip reader like myself, it's very tiring and it's hard work, lip reading people all day, so just be really patient with them. And so for us, a little bit of patience, empathy and kindness goes a long way. So, it does help. And also just, just ask us, are you okay? And how can we help you? Some really magic words for in the deaf community.
Fantastic. Thank you. So this has been great stuff, hugely insightful to me, and I hope it has been to our audience as well. Thank you both so much for sharing your lived experience and expertise. And thanks to our audience for joining us for this important conversation. Remember, diversity is not just something to be tolerated, it's something to be celebrated. We all have unique perspectives, and by embracing diversity in all its forms, we enrich our communities and create a more inclusive world for everyone. It's important we make a conscious effort to include and not exclude people due to their human characteristics and challenges, because inclusion matters. And this goes way beyond being aware of any unconscious bias. It's conscious inclusion, and we need to approach it with curiosity, dignity, compassion, and respect. Please do connect with Sarah and Ruth, and I hope I'll see you next week when my guests and I will be exploring the theme of neurodivergence and trauma and coping strategies for complex PTSD as part of our Mental Health Awareness Week. And stay awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye now.